Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're diving into an incredibly provocative 2026 paper by Amir Mohamad Ardalan. And let me tell you, it completely challenges our most fundamental assumptions about legal philosophy. For over 2 millennia, we basically held up justice as the ultimate gold standard for any legal system. But what if that very concept is actually the thing holding us back? Today, we're going to unpack this fascinating argument that procedural justice has basically become an empty shell, and we'll explore a radically dynamic alternative rooted in the ancient Iranian tradition called the Ashaic order.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the core problem with justice, exactly how it lost its way, what the Ashaic order actually is, the triaxial scale used to measure it, and finally, how this framework can future-proof the law. All right, let's start right at the beginning with part 1, the problem with justice. Think about how often we hear the word justice thrown around today. The author points out a massive crisis in this abstract paradigm where a term used by literally everyone ceases to perform any meaningful work at all. From Plato to Rawls, justice is constantly invoked, but it's completely lost its determinate content. When every single legal system in the world, regardless of how it actually impacts real people's lives, claims to be just, the word frankly stops meaning anything. It just becomes a convenient shield for the status quo.
It's what we call an empty signifier. Because justice lacks measurable metrics, it can't differentiate between regimes or actually guide institutional design. It leaves us entirely untethered from real-world outcomes. You know the old saying, right? If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Well, the paper argues that abstract ideals fiercely resist empirical assessment. Our current legal philosophy might speak endlessly about fairness, but it entirely fails to distinguish between a procedurally fair system that produces a terrible outcome and an unfair procedure that functionally improves people's lives.
Which brings us nicely to part 2, how justice actually lost its way.
Now, what's really interesting here is the 5 windows perspective. It's a methodology from the Persian Renaissance project that diagnoses exactly when a concept drifts into sheer bureaucracy. By looking back at ancient Zoroastrian texts like the Gathas and the Avesta, the author retrieves the original functional core of societal rules. The critical part is this 3rd window, deviation. This is where a legal system shifts from actually solving human coordination problems to just preserving its own bureaucracy. The author calls this functional Druj, which basically translates to functional deceit.
To see this absurd formalism in action, let's look at this famous German civil law case. A veterinarian's liability hinged entirely on a massive, almost comical conceptual knot: whether the civil code legally classified a horse as a thing. Yes, an actual object. The legal machinery was running perfectly, doing exactly what it was designed to do, but it had completely forgotten what it was running for. The system becomes this dense procedural maze that only the highly resourced can actually navigate.
And this brilliantly illustrates what we could call the tyranny of fairness. It proves that a system can be procedurally perfect on paper, yet systematically oppressive to marginalized groups in reality. When the law prioritizes procedural correctness over real-world outcomes, it just turns into a sword for the powerful. Think about a modern algorithmic decision-making system for a second. It might apply the exact same rules to every single person, which formally, yes, is just. But if those rules systematically disadvantage a specific demographic, what you actually get is functional oppression.
So, how do we fix this deviation? That takes us to part 3, the Ashaic order.
Instead of constantly asking the unanswerable question, is this rule just, the Ashaic approach flips the script. It asks us to measure the actual functional consequences of the law. It shifts our entire focus. It tells us to stop chasing this static, abstract ideal that we can never truly define anyway, and instead look at the tangible reality of human relations. We need to be asking, are we actually reducing conflict here? Are we enhancing human flourishing?
This builds a system where justice becomes the aspirational outcome, sure, but the Ashaic order provides the actual measurable engine to get us there. And the author makes a really crucial point here. We aren't just throwing justice in the trash. That would just be replacing one universal magical solution with another. Instead, think of Ashaic as a vector, a direction of movement that evolves right alongside society. Justice remains that beautiful horizon we aim for, but the Ashaic order gives us the operational criteria to actually track if we're moving closer to it.
Let's move to part 4, the triaxial scale. This is where we see how to actually operationalize this theory. To do this, we use the Maqasid al-Mafahim theory, which translates to the purposes of concepts. This maps out the empirical core of the Ashaic order, giving lawmakers and judges actual data points to track performance. Look at these three pillars. Predictability is all about stabilizing our everyday legal expectations. Viability goes much deeper. It's existential. It measures whether the law actually reduces symbolic violence and increases social hope. And finally, synergy is about collective efficiency. Does this rule reduce transaction costs and help us actually work together better? The amazing thing is, we can empirically measure these indicators.
Now, the sequence of these criteria isn't random. It's strictly causal. It's basically a genetic chain. You cannot achieve societal synergy without first establishing baseline predictability for the individual. Think about it. If a person doesn't have predictability in their everyday environment, they simply can't maintain their motivation or viability. And if individuals aren't viable, society as a whole cannot achieve synergy. You literally have to build it from the ground up, step by step.
Finally, let's look at Part 5, Future-Proofing the Law.
So by retrieving the original purposes of concepts, the law can maintain a sense of permanence while surgically adapting to entirely new eras. The paper uses the Behistun inscription, which is this massive ancient rock relief in Iran, as a metaphor for this normative stability. We can dig under centuries of accumulated bureaucratic clutter to find the true original intent of a law, linking it firmly back to the lived world of actual human coordination.
What's absolutely fascinating here is that the Ashaic scale gives us the exact toolkit we need to handle one of our biggest modern crises, autonomy in artificial intelligence. Traditional ideas of justice completely freeze up when dealing with algorithmic governance because, well, they're based on human intent and rigid procedural rules. But if we shift to the Ashaic subject, we don't need to debate an AI's intent. That doesn't even make sense. Instead, we simply evaluate the AI's actions based on whether they functionally increase predictability, viability, and synergy for human beings. It is just incredibly pragmatic.
When we cross-examine this against modern heavyweights like Rawls, Posner, and Habermas, the Ashaic order uniquely prioritizes objective function and existential viability over mere process or pure economics. Unlike Rawls, it actually cares about real-world outcomes over procedural rules. Unlike Posner's somewhat cold economic efficiency, it injects existential viability and real hope into the equation. And unlike Habermas, who relies on subjective consensus, the Ashaic order grounds itself in the objective, measurable truth of how human beings actually coordinate with one another.
So, as you reflect on this Persian Renaissance in legal philosophy, consider this. Are we going to keep settling for the abstract myth of justice, or are we finally ready to abandon empty signifiers for a system built on measurable truth and actual human coordination? The blueprint is right here in front of us. The only question left is, are we brave enough to use it?